For many years, a Celtic Sojourn on GBH radio has been a prime outlet in Boston for traditional music with roots in Europe and many branches elsewhere. Normally, a Christmas Celtic Sojourn would expand that into a live performance in a hall full of people, a cross between old-fashioned radio and a holiday reunion. This year, it has to be done differently, but in the same spirit. And to explain is the host of a Celtic Sojourn, Brian O'Donovan. Good to see you again, Brian.
Great to see you, Chris. I missed this year my trip over to BU to see the vitality of that wonderful campus as I visit you fairly regularly. But good to be back with you, even if online.
Well, good to see you again. I'm remembering early in the pandemic, you were scrambling, you were reading stories. I was listening to some of that myself, but there must have been a time early on when you felt that, what are we going to do for the holidays? I mean, we can't do what we did before. How did you feel?
Well, I guess like everybody else in the world, it's such a worldwide phenomenon that we're going through. We felt sad and challenged and really wondering what was the next move for us. If you remember, back in March, you and I talked about our St. Patrick's Day Celtic Sojourn, and I think when we put that down on videotape, so to speak, the pandemic was in the background, but it hadn't arrived yet, pretty much. Well, we got only one of those shows off, the six that we had talked about, and everything else was cancelled. So that was the start of it for us, a kind of a realization and a hit over the head that live music presentations were going to be the first thing dramatically hit and probably the last thing to come back online, and that's still the case. Now, we didn't know, nobody knew back then how long this would last, so we were looking ahead and saying maybe we'll get a festival in Rockport in August. And how foolish were we back then, if you think in retrospect now, to even think like that. But then we said, December, let's hold off and see what happens. And by late April, May, I think everybody knew this wasn't going anywhere quickly, and we were going to be into the spring at the very least before we could even raise our heads up. So we started looking at what we would do. Would we broadcast old shows? Would we, do something relatively simple? And our cast and staff, the key people that we work with, got together and said, no, let's do something really, really good. Let's really respond to the need that's out there, the fact that this has become a ritual for people in the Boston and in the New England area. We can't just abrogate our responsibilities. We've got to give them something. So that's when the plans started to come together.
Well, before we get into the details of how you're going to sort of reconstitute what you did before, maybe we can acquaint some of our viewers, especially if they haven't been acquainted already, with what you've done over the years. And we're going to bring up a little bit of an excerpt on that right now.
I'm Brian O'Donovan. I am the producer and host of A Christmas Celtic Sojourn. What we try to create in A Christmas Celtic Sojourn is not so much a concert as it is a gathering. And it really reflects the gatherings that I had growing up in my house.
Brian is he just brings you in. It's so personal for him.
That was my childhood, my Christmas childhood in Clonakilty.
It's sort of, going over to someone's, house for a very well-produced holiday dinner party with good lighting and all that kind of thing.
Brian, what you do with a Celtic Sojourn, it's not just a performance by one group in one place at one time. This is a whole holiday experience with some overtones of old-fashioned radio. Tell us a little bit about how that's supposed to work.
Well, I've always been a fan of old-fashioned variety shows. I grew up with them. I grew up with the Andy Williams show and Danny Kaye and all the American shows and the equivalents in Ireland, but they exported a lot of them to us when I was growing up in the 60s, in the early days for us of television itself, in actual fact. So I was always fascinated with that. It comes from vaudeville, it comes from old music hall structures, and when I was putting together A Christmas Celtic Sojourn initially, I loved that idea of, having a song and then a piece of comedy and then maybe a piece of poetry and then a spectacular musical virtuosic performance and then maybe a dance and then a bit of humor again. And that's really what a Christmas Celtic Sojourn reflects, that kind of old-fashioned value of gathering somewhere and watching something or being a part of something that truly was variety based. And what better time than at Christmas to bring that out onto stages around New England.
Well, one of the advantages of online performance is that you don't have that barrier of space that you do in a single hall. And I think you have some performers who are going to be plugging in here from other parts of the world.
Well, that raises the interesting construct of this, Chris, which was, on the one hand, extraordinarily stressful and difficult to pull off. On the other hand, was liberating and, enlightened us as to what is possible. So, in a pandemic, first of all, you've got to get the core group together if you're going to do such, and we were. So we put together a core group in a quarantine situation up in Rockport, with incredible support from Rockport Music and their beautiful theatre up there, and some of their donors who gave us their houses to live in during this period of time. We quarantined, we tested, we got together, socially distanced, and tested again, and eventually got into a situation where we were like, I sometimes laugh, we were like the NBA of Celtic shows, and we were confident that the virus wasn't in that bubble. We remained segregated completely from the community, just ourselves, couldn't even go to a coffee shop, food was delivered in, and no outside contact. And we created a series of musical events that we then shipped over to our colleagues and collaborators in Edinburgh in Scotland, and Sligo in Ireland, Dingle, County Kerry, up to Canada for dancing, out to Michigan for some more dancing, and Vermont and the Berkshires for more vocal harmonies. So in a way, we created a worldwide event out of something that was local and in person, which is beautiful, and it's what we will go back to. But something taught us that the technological advances that have been made, thank God, in time for this pandemic, really provide opportunities for truly international collaboration, and it's been very uplifting to us to bring this together.
Some of these outside location contributions, these aren't going to be people sitting in their bedroom on Zoom. I mean, we've got somebody from a pub in County Kerry or Cathedral in Sligo.
Yes, absolutely. So we spend a lot of time choosing our backdrops and kind of, again, enhancing the experience and talking to these folks. And of course, we hired video and audio crews there as well, which was not easy, Chris, because you were dealing with different lockdown situations in these countries. So at one stage, we had the Cathedral lined up in Edinburgh, and a lockdown happened. So we had to wait for that to ease up and make sure that all of our musicians and any crew that were involved were safe. We had to do a similar thing in Kerry when that pub itself that we filmed one of our singers, Ailish Kennedy, in, she owns that pub, but it was closed down in a lockdown in Ireland. And in some ways that was good for us because it meant that she could actually film in it with nobody else around. So it varied. Outdoor dancing in Ottawa in Canada in December is not normally an enjoyable experience, but in our case it was. And they were outdoors in a safe environment as the videographers were filming Cara Butler dancing a reel to one of our pieces. So it kind of backdropped and reflected the pandemic itself in its nuance, in its difficulties, but also in a reassurance to us that the human spirit was going to come through in the piece. And you'll see that when you join us.
You have a singer from Sligo, and I think there's one song she's associated with it. I've seen it on YouTube, Down by the Sally Gardens, and the song itself is from Sligo.
It is, of course, Yeats, who wrote Down by the Sally Gardens. William Butler Yeats, one of the Nobel laureates of Irish literature, lived in that area and was inspired by that area fairly dramatically through his association with one Lady Gregory, who was a collaborative influence on his life and also a patron to a large extent. So it's an extraordinarily beautiful area, and Kathy Jordan, who is the lead singer with the group Dervish, I think brought a beautiful rendition of Down by the Sally Gardens. She joins us from Sligo Cathedral, where she sings O Come Emmanuel, Veni, Veni Emmanuel, actually in Latin, to introduce our whole virtual online. So it's we're just happy to be connected with that area of the country and with Kathy Jordan.
One of the things you do in these performances every holiday season is you do some storytelling, and I always felt like it was done fresh for that particular year. What are you doing this time?
A similar thing, you know, this time I've kind of reviewed almost what we've done in the past, and you know, it's hard, Chris. It's really something that we thought long and hard about. How would we structure this? It can't be a hippity hop to the barber shop, nothing is wrong out there type thing. It's a Christmas like no other that we've experienced in our lifetimes, and I hope we don't next Christmas. But it's a unique opportunity for us to go into ourselves, to look reflectively on our lives and what's important. And I do believe that the advantage of this for us is that we will never take a single moment, a single relationship, or time spent with another person for granted again. So in structuring a Christmas Celtic Sojourn this year, we thought of that, very, very carefully thought of that. And we realized that the overall online version of the show was going to be, because of the situation, was going to be perhaps a little bit more reflective, a little bit more thoughtful, and even a little more sentimental. So to answer your question directly, in my story, we kind of structured it like that. I structured it like that and went back to all of the stories that I've written over the last 17 years about my growing up, and kind of taken the elements of them that are really applicable to our current situation. Elements, for example, where I spoke one year, probably 10 years ago, about the value of home and what the concept of home is to people around the world, especially immigrants. And of course now the concept of home has changed for us. We're, each of us, speaking from our home. I'm in my studio tonight, but how often have you been on a Zoom call that is from your home? So that concept has changed. The rituals of our always was another theme that I explored a few years ago. Always being the things that we did every year at the same time in the same way. And for many people, coming to a Christmas Celtic Sojourn in downtown Boston or one of the other theatres was one of their always. Of course, not possible this year. So we reflect that in addressing directly the situation we find ourselves in my story, which is generally called A West Cork Christmas. So it is pretty specific this year.
Well, I will have to admit, when I heard your live performance reading from Dylan Thomas's A Child's Christmas in Wales, it brought up my memories of listening to a recording when I was a kid. So sometimes online is not so bad. If people want some more information about this, and by the way, about how you're working with performance venues to help them as well, where can they get that?
They can get that at christmasceltic.com. It's just Christmas Celtic, one word, .com, and all of the information is there to guide you through the process and to help you help others as well. In addition to the people involved in the production, as you point out, we're very conscious of the fact that the other theatres are dark at this time of the year, and we're trying to help them by providing this particular virtual online Christmas Celtic Sojourn in each of those venues, of course, theoretically in each of those venues, but reflecting the values of their contributions to their community and raising a few bucks at the same time.
Well, thank you very much for being with us and for being imaginative about it.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks for spreading the word through BNN. It's always great. It wouldn't be Christmas without me visiting BU this year, virtually doing that, and looking forward to being back with you there in person. And Adam, the great producer you have involved, I get to see him once or twice a year. Look forward to doing so in the coming years.
Well, good to see you again, and happy holidays.
And back to you guys too.
Brian O'Donovan from GBH Radio for A Christmas Celtic Sojourn. We'll have more news in just a moment.